Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Essential Creative Fireside Chat series. I am here with Tasha Wilson today. Hi, Tasha. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited to talk with you. I've been looking forward to this one all week. So the question everyone always loves when I ask them, tell us about yourself.
That is a loaded question. I always have to think like, where do I want to start? So, okay, I am an Eastern Shore native, small knit community, Talbot County to be exact. Grew up in a household, my mom, older brother, my father, and then I decided to go to college. And I decided to pursue two master's degrees in Baltimore, Maryland. So I came over on the opposite side of the bridge, decided to stay there, and I have never left. I love it. It's completely different than what I'm accustomed to, which is nice. But I really enjoy like a lot of things happening on the weekends and things like that, and really spending time with my friends. But ultimately, outside looking in, you would not know that I am extremely introverted. I really like being to myself. I like my own space. After a while, groups kind of make me feel a little exhausted and I have to decompress. And usually that happens with a hot cup of tea and looking out the window and looking at the sunset. But publicly, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, and I'm also a Title IX compliance case manager at a university. So I'm literally living out my purpose out loud.
Oh my gosh, I love this. So talk with us a little bit about the coaching that you do.
Yeah, so the coaching program is called Unmasking the Inner Me, and that really talks about taking a deep dive into some of the things that we kind of gloss over as women. So my target group is millennial women, and that's really kind of unlearning some habits, unlearning some mindsets, and really learning how to be the you that you've always been called in purpose to be. And so sometimes we have to uncover trauma, we have to uncover secrets, we always have to uncover certain stigmas that we have associated ourselves with, and really get to the heart and the core of who you are. And what I really love about this coaching program is that I can personally attest to that. And so I think sometimes, having the knowledge and textbooks, responses are nice, but when you actually lived it and you can actually have that personal connection, that's what really allows the relationship to foster between myself and my clients.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think there's such a big difference. I was sharing this actually with someone the other day. Like there's a little piece of me, not a huge piece. We were talking during the pre-show about started with my marriage and family therapy degree and then switched over to my MBA. I was 10 credits shy of my master's. And every now and then I'm like, if I could just go back to get to finish it so that I had the education to back it. But I'm like, I actually have more education than some of them teaching it because I lived some of that stuff that I would be talking to. But we always want those letters. Even though I never say MBA after my name, it's like almost like having the letters with like MFT or social worker like MSW. I think having the letters just makes you feel like that little bit of extra authority. So what a blessing to have both of them, to have lived it out and to be able to coach from a place of having lived it as well as having the education. So I heard a rumor, we were talking before, you just actually recently got a doctorate, correct?
Yes.
And so you have a few extra letters behind your name too, correct?
Yes.
Very nice. Very nice. So we were talking before, just for the audience. I've known her as Dr. Tasha. And so I was like, do I call you Dr. Tasha or do I call you Tasha? So she did say Tasha is fine. But she also answers to Dr. Tasha if you call it.
So yes, I will respond.
So it's always nice when you get that extra recognition. So, and I know that dissertations are not easy. So going through that whole process is not at all an easy one. So congratulations, on that and completing that. So you're also an author, and let's see if I can do this right here. So we worked together on The Purpose of My Pain with Dr. Tamika Hall. Tasha is one of the co-authors on that, and she wrote the chapter called H.O.P.E, Hope. He optimizes pain effectively. And so talk to us just a little bit about your chapter, and then share about what other kinds of writing you do and what your aspirations are there.
Yeah, so my chapter, one thing about me, I am known as a storyteller. I always try to set the foundation, whatever topic I'm talking about. And so in that chapter, I really kind of introduce what pain is, ultimately, how we may need to view that differently within itself. And so a lot of times we kind of look at pain as agony or, a burden, but it really is a blessing. It's a gift. And it really helps us acknowledge, one, that we're human, two, that we don't have the full capacity or strength to handle the problems that we face, and then three, really go back to our source, which is God. And that's where we'll get the hope. And it's like, if you don't experience pain, you won't understand the magnitude of hope. And so that's where the He optimizes pain effectively comes in. And I take the readers on a journey about two monumental moments of pain that I've actually experienced in my life. And I always tell people, honestly, without experiencing those things, I would not have understood the power of my voice, the value of my experiences, and then ultimately knowing that my life has purpose. I think that if those things didn't happen, I probably would still hide from the public. I would not be the leader that you see now. And I wouldn't be as confident as I am now. And so when you're so used to living life, just kind of scratching the surface and doing the bare minimum, you become content. But when you're then challenged to learn how to advocate for yourself and speak up for what's right, and then actually tap into the emotions that you're feeling and then address them, it changes who you are. It really sharpens who you are. You really understand the warrior that's always been inside of you. But it's like, if you're not provoked to tap into that, will you ever experience that,
That's a great question. You said something that speaks to me very much, and that's about using your voice. As a voice discovery coach, that is so important to me, is helping people understand that there's this voice within you. We could have had the exact same experience. Our voices will sound different. We might have the same story. That story could look exactly the same, but the voice with which we tell it is going to be so different. The audience we tell it to is going to be different. And you could have, the example I like to use is Lisa TerKeurst and T.D. Jakes. They both wrote, I promise you, the same book. She called hers, oh gosh, now I'm gonna mess it up. I think hers is called It Wasn't Supposed to Be Like This.
Yes.
And his was called Crushing. Same book. Same book. But I keep wanting to call him Dr. Jakes. Bishop Jakes is in his voice. It's the voice you're used to. You can almost hear that grovelly, authoritative, like he's explaining the grapes and you're with him and you're in it and you're crying and you're a mess. And then with Lisa TerKeurst's book, and she's sharing her story, you're reading it and it's a feel good, just like Lisa's used to. It hits you, but not in the same way. But yet they both went to #1 and they both stayed there for a long time. And I think they even overlapped for a little while. I think they were both in. And so that's such a great example of, like, there's people that read both. Like, I read both. There's people that only read T.D. Jakes, and there's people that only read Lisa TerKeurst, and yet all of the people got the message, which was, just because you go through something detrimental does not mean it's over. It means that God's doing something amazing in you. So let's talk about, like, what you learned with how your voice came out. And I think this relates to, it's been 21 years and 3 days since you had your pivotal moment. So I open the floor to you.
So it's so funny that you mentioned that, because one thing about grief, like, even though you prepare yourself for that day, because it's a constant reminder of what happened, you still don't know how you're going to react on that day. You don't know how you're going to feel until the day actually happens. And so for me, it's always kind of been like a wave. Some years I'm okay, some years I'm not, some years it just feels indifferent. Like, how am I supposed to respond, or how am I supposed to react, knowing what happens. And so March 14th, 2001 is a day I will never forget. It was the day my father passed away. I was 16 years old, our usual routine. He's supposed to pick me up from cheerleading practice. He was never late. My dad was in the Marines, so time was of the essence for him. And so I'm like, okay, a few minutes go by. Now we're in 30 minutes. I'm kind of like, well, where's my dad? And he was also a big communicator. And that's one trait that I definitely have of his. I just love effective communication. I like to make sure that when I'm speaking, people can understand what I'm saying. They have the ability to ask questions for clarification. And that's just how he was. And so if he were going to be late, he would have told me, and he would have told me well in advance. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, why is he not here? What's going on? So I'm calling and I'm not getting a response, which is also different because he would respond. He was very responsive. And so I'm like, okay, what's really going on? So in that second, I'm getting upset because he's not answering. And I'm just like, why is he ignoring my phone calls? Like, what is really happening? And so that whole day was a series of emotions 21 years ago, because in that moment, I'm getting angry and I'm getting frustrated and I'm confused as to why he's not responding. I also hear a loud boom. And I'm like, well, what is that? And I look outside and it's black smoke in the air and the ground literally shook. So I'm like, that's interesting. Like, again, growing up in a small knit community, stuff like that doesn't happen. And so I'm kind of like, okay, I don't know what to think of this. I don't really know what's going on. But in the meantime, I'm just going to stay put until I'm, given further instructions. And so what escalates after a few hours later, I then realize my mom is asking for me to come home. So, other people that see me out there, they're kind of like, yeah, your mom needs you to come home. And I'm like, okay, what's going on or whatever. And so someone actually slipped up and told me what happened before my mom had the opportunity to, which was awkward. Again, I'm 16 years old. And so they're like, I'm so sorry to hear. I'm sorry for your loss. Again, I'm not sure what's going on. So then I call my brother on a payphone. Okay, this is just aging myself a little bit.
These were these things that you had to go press buttons, guys, and you put a quarter in. And actually, I think it's even more than a quarter now. So that's aging
exactly.
me. Right? I remember when they were 10 cents.
Right. We had one in high school, So
right.
I called my brother and I was like, did you hear anything? What's going on? And he says, and he's at work. So someone slipped up and told him as well. And he was like, they're saying he's gone. And I said, who? And he's like, Dad. And I said, what are you talking about? And he was like, we'll talk about it later. And so then at the time, my then boyfriend, his sister is like blowing the horn and she's like, get in the car. And so that's how I knew then something is drastically wrong. And on the way taking me home, I couldn't concentrate. I was a little jittery and I just knew. I said, what they're saying is true. So then when I get home, it was like a Lifetime movie. There's police cars in front of the house. My mom literally runs out the door and she's screaming, piercing screams. And she's like, Tasha. I said, I already heard. And she said, what did you hear? What did you hear? And I said, I heard that Dad passed and she lost it. And so, moving forward ahead, I understood after being questioning and going through a series of court visits, because they're trying to get to the bottom of it, of what happened. So the loud boom, the black smoke and the ground shaking actually was the explosion that took his life. And it was a work-related incident. And so they were coming, reporters trying to get questions to figure out who was at fault. Was it him or was it, the job? And so them trying to paint this picture of my dad, it was really weird. So then my brother at the time was 21. So he's pulling me to the back and saying, you don't need to be around here. You don't need to know what's going on with the conversation. And so what happened is that ultimately, after going through the whole investigation piece and all of that and through the process, they realized that the machine was actually at fault. It was a faulty machine that they were operating on. And somehow, after a while, just like you would do with the wound, if you're not treating it properly, what's going to happen, right? It becomes infected. Same thing with the machine. It was just kind of like, we're just going to like weigh this one out a little bit, weigh this one out, until one day it just couldn't contain what it was supposed to store and ultimately took the life of my father. Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Now, you're 16 in high school dealing with all of this. And your brother's very young too, 21. While back then it was a little older than it feels now.
Yeah.
I feel like we lost some years in the last 20 years.
Yes.
16 has become much, I was a mom at 16. I found out I was pregnant, had my daughter at 17. I can't even imagine today's 16-year-old. But still, even back then, looking back, I realized like, I was still just a baby, even though we felt so much older back then.
Yes.
How over the coming years, so you said, like the grief, it does, it's kind of like Christmas, right? It's coming every year, but yet it still sneaks up on you, we're all like rushing at the last minute, like, oh, it's here. But unlike Christmas, it's not this thing you look forward to. It's this I think of it like my divorce. It's like April 9th every year, just kind of creeps up. The good news is my little cousin was born that day. So like, I always try to think like, well, we lost a family member and gained one, but like, it's a day that it's almost like, I know like with the divorce, that kind of grief, it's like an anticipation and almost where I'm like, I don't know what's going to come. I don't know if this is going to be the year that I'm, and this wouldn't happen in your case, obviously, but like, I don't know if it's going to be the year where I like breathe deeply and go, okay, I'm free of it. Or is this going to be the year that I spend all day crying because I'm like, I lost such a big piece of me that day, even if it needed to happen because of the domestic violence and stuff, there still is a big piece of you that's tied into that. When it comes to, and the reason I mentioned that is me and a girlfriend were talking, she lost her fiance to death the same year that I lost my ex-husband to just him walking out. And while it was not the same thing, it felt that way because he was just there one night and then gone the next morning. And so it was kind of like, even though he is somewhere still in this world, I never like got to talk to him and stuff. So it was like this grief in terms of like, there never was a closure. Right? And so I imagine I was 31 dealing with that. How did that, I was 30. How did that feel as a 16-year-old? Like, kind of walk us through that grief and the coming years. Like, what did you do to get stronger? What tips do you have for somebody listening who maybe is, we've all kind of handled grief in so many experienced grief in so many ways over the last couple of years, whether it was loss of jobs, loss of family members, etc.
So at 16, the rest of the year honestly was a blur. All I knew is, the night before was the last time I saw my dad, because at the time he was leaving much earlier. So here's a caveat. So he was actually doing a coworker's job. Coworker was on vacation. So the job that my father typically did, he wasn't doing. And it actually was the last day he was finishing up the project for the coworker. And this actually will tie into my present day. So that's why I had to mention that. I do remember the night before, he was just like, I'm so tired of having to get up a little earlier and go to work and do this. And I'm so glad this is my last day. I don't have to worry about it. Right. And so, of course, at that time, and he was very family oriented. So at that time, we didn't see him in the morning. Like, of course, he would kiss my mom and the last words were, I love you. And then he walks out the door. So my anticipation is seeing him in the afternoon. That was just our time. And so when that didn't happen, I felt like I was robbed of that experience of having closing remarks, if you will, with my dad. Like, okay, what was he thinking up until that moment? Like, how did he feel in that moment? So then I started, considering, what went through his head when he noticed, okay, something is wrong here, what's going on, and all of that. Because my dad was always someone who would place everybody else's needs before his, hence him doing his coworker's job. And so my mind immediately went there. Like, what were his last thoughts? Like, I'm sure he was thinking about us, what was going on in his mind of sheer panic, right? And so then it went from there to I'm frustrated because the person that he, supported in doing their job, they still have an opportunity to go home and my dad does not. And then it goes from mentally shutting down because now everyone is so consumed with our lives that they feel like they deserve access to what's going on 24/7. So all of this is happening at 16. And then I'm placed in a grief group in high school, and they actually think that I want to talk, So
That's
like,
what every
no.
16-year-old wants to do to start, right?
Exactly. Like that's already, an unconventional age when you're still trying to figure out who you are. So to put me in a grief group with other people that I don't feel comfortable being around, and you expect me to start talking. So that didn't happen. And I was given a notebook and a pen. And honestly, that was the pivotal moment of where I understood the power of my words.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those, like, you hate it and you love it, right?
Yeah.
So I am a juvenile offender / foster kid, right? Growing up in a time where things were very different, right? It wasn't like yell at your kid and your kid's taken out of your home. It was like pretty much you had to do a ton of abuse for it. And so a lot of the time the kid was at fault, right? The kid had anger issues. The kid had this. And when I still remember the first night I got to juvenile hall, and it was like, here's a composition book. And I'd always been a writer. I've been writing since I was about 6 or 7. Like just since I get my first poem was about friends and lovers. And like, it was the like deepest and yet like, what is that kind of poem? But I share that because up to that point, like I was 14, I believe, at this moment. So up to that point, it's me writing when I'm sad, me writing when I'm frustrated, this kind of thing. Now I'm in a cell and they give you this composition book and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
Right. But yet it was my best friend.
Yeah.
Like, I do think, like you just said, that's where I realized the power of my voice. I believe that Black composition book is what taught me my voice.
Yes.
That is where I learned how to put my words down in a way that was productive and saved me from being that kid that just went in and out of the system over and over and over. Share. So you get this notebook and now what happens?
So I'm writing in that thing every day. I'm carrying it with me. I share like the innermost parts of me. I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm confused. Every detail of how I'm feeling, every emotion is written in that book. And every time I wrote, though, I felt a sense of freedom. I just felt like I was no longer feeling heavy with the emotions that I carried. It was a release for me. And as I began writing and I continued to write, I then became a little stronger in vocalizing how I felt, and vocalizing boundaries. I think that's where I really learned boundaries, honestly, at that age, because, in less than 24 hours, no one really is concerned about what's going on in my life. And now everyone is concerned about what's going on in my life, and not coming from a genuine place, but more so, the first label, oh, that's the girl whose father got killed, that kind of thing. Or they're saying he was found like this or that, those kind of things. And they're like, I wonder if it's true, those kind of things. And then seeing how if we're going to fall apart as a unit, my mom, my brother and I, or if we're going to come together and be stronger. And so now everybody's watching, and I really felt like, and I always say this jokingly, but it's true, like we were a science experiment. It was just kind of like, this was a major thing that happened in that small knit community. So people don't really know how to react to it. And so now they're trying to figure it out, but to our expense, you know? And so for me, as I continue to write and I continue to speak up about it and say, hey, you know, to you, this is hot news, this is tea, but this is my life. I'm living this, and we're trying to figure out a new level of normalcy after this. We need time to really grieve. We need time to really figure out what life is going to look like for us, taking a huge loss. And so being 16 and standing up for my family was very empowering. And I'm like, who is this girl? Because growing up, my brother always spoke for me. I was very quiet. I hid behind him. I didn't say anything. But in that moment, I said, I need to stand up for our family. I need to speak on how we're feeling, because my mom, you know, that was her high school sweetheart. She was so distraught. She just really had no recollection of what's going on. My brother kind of inadvertently stood up as the man of the house and then started teaching me things that my father would have. Like, he taught me how to drive, you know, those things that at 21, like, you think of 21-year-olds now, that's a lot to carry on your plate as a 21-year-old, you know. And so, like, the things that I would have had conversations with our dad about, my brother kind of stepped in. And so we always laugh about it now with his, now that he has his own children, but he's kind of like, I'm kind of like his first child, because a lot of things that I had to learn, he taught me, you know. And so those kind of things. And so I had to be that one to say, you know what, let me be the voice for us. Let me go ahead and say what needs to be said, because I think sometimes people get so captivated by a circumstance that they don't consider who's been impacted. And so by doing that, I became a part of Kids Chance of Maryland, which was also a scholarship fund that my guidance counselor introduced me to. And so then I started being like the keynote speaker at their conferences. And here I am, 16-year-old, you know, started speaking up, talking about my story, helping others who went through similar experiences. And even then, I still did not tap into the magnitude of the gift that was inside of me. I just knew that, okay, this is fine. This is all I have to do. I'm content with this. And God was like, no, there's more. There's more for you. There's more that I need you to do. And so as time escalates, and, you know, I'm now thinking about school, college, what am I going to do? And so quite honestly, my first choice of undergrad was really just a way to escape what was familiar. I was like, I don't want anyone to know my story. I don't want anyone to have a preconceived notion of who I am. And then I get hit with something else. I get to school and then I'm sexually assaulted. And I'm kind of like, what is really going on? What is happening? And I had this whole come to Jesus experience. Like, I know you said, Lord, there's more. I didn't know that this was a part of that more, you know? Usually when we think of more, we're automatically thinking abundance, but we don't think about process. It's kind of like, just give it to me. You already said I'm going to get it, but it's kind of like, how do you get there? And how do you get prepared to receive the abundance, you know? And so when I tell you, pain is not punishment, it's really not. Pain really, honestly, and truly gives you permission to expand, to evolve, to grow. And honestly, it wasn't until the sexual assault experience that I really had to understand the importance of self-worth and self-love. I think for me, I had an idea of what love was, but it wasn't until I hated myself and I didn't like myself to understand the importance of speaking life to myself and loving myself.
So first of all, I think my audience knows by now, but just in case, and because I know sometimes like you guys still like to share it with yours, when I look down, I'm writing sticky notes. This is so I don't interrupt, because I do have ADHD. So otherwise I'm like, oh, that while you're talking to. So I've learned how to use the sticky note trick. So first going, oh man, back a little bit, something that came to mind is you mentioned you were a cheerleader.
Yeah.
And this thought came to mind about going from the performer to the
Uh-huh.
performance.
Yep.
Like what a difference, like choosing to be the
Mm-hmm.
center of attention
Mm-hmm.
versus being, and we were talking during like the pre-show of
Yeah.
like that introverted nature. And I
Yes.
know I can own any stage that I'm speaking on. As a youth leader, I'm
Mm-hmm.
great teaching a lesson. Put
Mm-hmm.
me in a networking meeting and people are like, man, that girl's quiet. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like,
Mm-hmm.
Shell? Like I've never seen her be quiet, but
Mm-hmm.
oh man, you get a group and it's too much. I have social anxiety and
Yes.
I can't do it. There's too many personalities. I'm afraid I'll say something to offend someone. So it's
Mm-hmm.
different when I choose to
Yes.
be the performer
Mm-hmm.
than when suddenly I'm the center of attention. That
Yes.
and it's funny because you are the center, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
choosing it as a cheerleader, but it's
Mm-hmm.
different when you choose and you know and you're
Yeah.
prepared and I think of like, singers and they do their little octaves and
Yes.
stuff like that. Like they're choosing to go on stage. That's
Mm-hmm.
way different than being in your house and you're
Mm-hmm.
singing and then all of a sudden everybody else quiets down and they're like,
Exactly.
just staring
Uh-huh.
at you. So how did what you already said, like that was a lot to handle, but were there any tips you have for anyone going through that right now?
Mm-hmm.
Things you use to manage that or ways that you were able to use your voice
Yeah.
to speak up for it? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. Some tips. And I still do this 21 years later. Give yourself grace. Sometimes you may not respond the way that you want to initially because of that moment, but give yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up for it. Sometimes people approach you in ways because they just don't know or they just don't understand. They really don't know what to say. And honestly, don't view people as your enemy. They're really your ally. They just want to make sure you're okay, but no one really knows how to talk to someone who experienced a loss, right? And so they're just trying to figure out the words to say, or they don't want to say the wrong thing. So give yourself grace, but also extend that grace to others, because we're all trying to figure it out. But then also give yourself time to process exactly what's going on as well. That's very important because after a while, if you try to move around feeling that pain or try to move around acknowledging that hurt or even addressing the loss, it will catch up with you sooner or later. And so it's perfectly normal, it's perfectly healthy to have a whole pendulum of emotions. Like in one day, I remember I was mad, then I was sad, then I was upset, then I was confused. It's okay. And understand that the grieving process is not linear. I think sometimes, we may try to put a timetable of, because it's been 21 years, why do I still feel this way? But if the person who passed had that much of an impact on your life, they really meant something to you, that love never fades. So don't think that the grief will. It's just that you may learn how to adjust, and not having them physically there, but that doesn't mean you've forgotten about them. And then also, remember their legacy. Sometimes, that really helps me. Like if I have a moment, because milestones will come up to remind you that the person is no longer there. But remember when they were there, how you felt with them being in your life, and then, how they would feel to celebrate where you are now. And so it's really important. And then learn to live again. That's another tip. Learn to live again because they would want you to, you know. And as cliche as it sounds, right? Because sometimes we're like, how do I live without this person? But they want you to live. They want you to really tap into the fullness of who you are. Because you deserve to be happy. You deserve to feel joy. You deserve to experience great things. And so don't feel like your life has to stop just because you suffered a tremendous loss.
Nice. on the other side of that, for the people speaking to you, as you were talking, it made me think of, I have a friend whose 17-year-old brother was murdered. And, you know, that's another unexpected loss. You don't know. And I remember like just not knowing what to say.
Yeah.
And there were moments that it was just like, if you need to just be, I'm here. Even if that means breathing on the phone. I've had other friends like who have dealt, especially like after when George Floyd was murdered, there was that moment like with my African-American friends where it was like, you're angry and I'm white.
Yeah.
If you need to say something, say it to me. Like, use me as the sounding board for everything you want to say to the people saying the wrong things. I don't mind. And something that one of my friends shared, she's an African-American woman, and she was having like a lot of issues. And she said, and I think this applies to death too, but this has really stuck with me. And I kind of heard it like in the back of my head as you were talking, is she said, it's better to say something than to say nothing. And she's like, you know, my white friends just stopped talking to me because they didn't know what to say. And so then when things settled down, really, she said, like, then they started reaching out, and it was like, well, we didn't know what to say. And it's like, do you think it's better now? Like, did it just go away? Like it's been a year, you know, 2 years now. So, okay. And it's like, no, it's better to say, I don't know what to say. And that would be the same with grief, correct? Like, I don't know what to say in that situation. I've not lost my dad suddenly. But I know when he had a stroke and I had to sit there and watch him try to find words. Even with a tumultuous relationship that we have, that's like this grinding, and yet he's my best friend. Oh my gosh, I had to walk out of the room because I didn't want him to see me cry. So I can't even imagine what it would be like, but I can't imagine not saying anything. And so I almost feel like it's better to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. You know, I think of Job, right? When his friends were like, we're just going to come sit naked with you. It's not awkward. This isn't weird, you know? And they just sat in silence. Come do that, because if I can get in the mud when you're messy and we don't know what to say, that's so much better than just disappearing from my life or making me the performance. Talking about me, but not to me. Evaluating me, giving me the 3-star review, but yet in my face, you are silent. Okay. So I love what you said, and it will definitely become a quote graphic. Usually I have to rewatch the talks to find them, but you said pain gives you permission to evolve, expand, and grow. Wow. If I knew sound effects, I would probably insert applause here, because wow. Like that, I've never looked at it that way. And yet when you look at, you know, going back to the book for a minute, every story in here, I'm still just amazed at how, you know, in Dr. Hall's talk, I was telling her, as somebody who's worked in the industry, I was like, how is she going to have so many authors together and it be one story? I really thought it was going to be like a day, stop, read the next day, stop, read the next day. And you would feel like a collection of stories all about the purpose and the pain, but very disparate stories. And instead, it's like you read this and it's almost like we all did life together before this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like they weave in, and I'm just, I was blown away. And I know, like, you know, like I shared with her, yes, God, and also the credit to you to have woven them together. You know, as far as I know, this wasn't a lottery system of just, I'll haphazardly place them. You know, she read them and put them. And so when you look at pain and you look at this concept of there's purpose in your pain, I like how you talked about, and I can't remember now if you said this in here or when we were talking beforehand. So if there's a little gap to the people watching this, I apologize. We had a couple minutes before this that we were getting to know each other because we just met face to face beforehand. So as with the couple of other authors you guys have met so far, Tasha and I met like literally 5 minutes before we jumped on this.
Mhm.
You were talking about like there's a process, and while we want the more, we want the abundance. I've never looked at it in the sense of my more could be saying like, okay, bring me to the sexual assault. It was on this that you mentioned it. It could be that my more is saying I'm ready for the divorce. My more could be I'm ready for the pain, the loss of the child, whatever that more is that brings me to the abundance. Because until I've gone through the things that bring me to what my platform is. And when you were talking about that, I thought of when Robin and I were talking last night or a couple nights ago. I thought about how I didn't want all of it. And I stopped talking about being a domestic violence victim for a while because I didn't want to be known for that. I don't want you to go there, Shell. Oh, her platform is domestic violence because I felt like that made him the main character. And I don't want him to be the main character in my story. And what I had to realize in the journey is I'm the main character because I survived. And even though it, you know, like, so my story isn't like others. I didn't choose to leave. He did. And so it's very different. You don't usually hear about abuse where it's like that. And I had a 6-month-old and a 13-year-old. And I realized that I kept going to become the woman I am today. I didn't sit in it. So I do still get to be the hero of my story. And so while I don't know that I still want to be known for that, you know what I mean? Like I'm still working out with God. Like, is that a certain platform for, you know, certain parts of your story? And this is where I'm going with this is the responsible storytelling. There is some parts of your story that are for certain audiences. And then there are other parts of your story that is what you're known for. And I like what you said in that, like, there was this moment of, and you didn't say it in these words, but almost where you like had to close the door because of all the inauthentic, I don't know if that's a word, but we're going to call it that. Like, you know, disgenuine people that will be like, oh, I'm so sorry, but it's really just to get the information. Or the people that come up and they're a part of your life, but only to be able to learn more about you. How did you, get to a place of deciding what stories you wanted to use your voice for and which ones you were like, I'm going to say them, but they're within this side? Because I know that that's a different process for all of us. You know, it's not like anyone can write the book on how to tell responsible storytelling.
And that's a great question because this takes me back to my childhood. I've always been told at an early age that I was very discerning of people. I automatically knew who not to go to, who not to be around, or who to bring close. And it was funny because, you know, like now they say, oh, you had an old soul, right? You know, they'll say, but my grandmother was like, no, you were always very discerning. You were different. Like she said, it was just certain people you just would not. You know, and we're kind of like, what's going on? You know, why doesn't she feel comfortable or want to be around these people, or, you know, those kind of things. And then later on, when the people expose themselves, they're kind of like, oh, okay, you know, certain things. And like even now, and I've always been very wise. Like I remember, you know, even when I was a teacher at one point, like the students would say, oh, Miss Wilson, you're so wise. Like, where is this coming from? You know, and it's just something that's always been innately in me. But I understand the importance of the gift of being discerning and wise because it comes into play now. And even before these things happened, I didn't know that they would be the very tools that I would use to kind of combat everything that I've been experiencing. And so for me, it's always just kind of knowing who's around in the highs and who's around in the lows. And so for me, that really sharpens my discernment as to who to share what with. And so, you know, prime example, when I see that a lot of people are so attached to the outcome of my story. And what I mean by that is they look at the glory part of it but they just kind of negate everything that kind of got me to that. But then when you see people who are really aligned with who I am and who I'm becoming, then that's the difference. And so, because there are some people who just really want to be a part of the journey just to say that they're a part, but it's kind of like, but you weren't there with me. You weren't there with me in the mud. You're more so chasing the clout that stems from the pain that I've had to endure or the lessons that I've had to learn. And so you're just more consumed with the finished and final product, but you don't care about anything else. And so I know for me, because I am someone who's very transparent, I'm someone who's vulnerable, and I'm someone who's authentic, that I can't just allow people who are concerned with fluff to be in my inner court. It has to be people that are saying, okay, we understand and we celebrate where you are now, but we also won't forget the steps that got you here, because we have to recognize both. If you're going to tell your story, you got to tell the whole story. And it's good to see when you're helping someone else out or you're extending that olive branch, that you're letting them know where you are currently. I was there. I understand, but let me show you the other side of this. And this is what overcoming looks like, or this is what being healed looks like, or this is what being set free looks like. So that way you're not just giving them the solution without the formula.
I love that. Two resources. So anybody who's watched me for a while knows that I read for a living. I love to read. I don't literally get paid to read, but like it pretty much should be my living. I really probably missed a calling in like being a book reviewer or something. But so to be true to myself, Relational Intelligence by Dr. Darius Daniels. Mm-hmm. If y'all have not read the book, Tasha mentioned the people who are there chasing the cloud. These are the people you'll notice that whenever you have drama, they're there with you, mm-hmm. because then later it can be like, oh, well, I was with Tasha in her hard times. Mm-hmm. But then they're not there with you in the highs. Like it's funny because there are some people just attracted to the drama. Yes. But then when you're in a good space, they don't know what to do with that because they don't know how to celebrate your victories. Mm-hmm. They only know how to be there and feed you while you're down. Mm-hmm. And there's other people who are only there in your highs. They only, mm-hmm. like you mentioned, want the glory. And then you talked about who's in your inner court, who to bring in. In Relational Intelligence, Dr. Darius Daniels talks about the 2, the 12, and the many. And it's based upon Jesus and how he had the 2, the 12, and the many. And so grab the book if you're having any struggle with friendship. If you're wondering from a Christian perspective, we struggle sometimes as Christians where we think we have to let everybody in. Yes. Read the Bible. start anywhere. Feel free to go to the Old Testament to start, or start in the New Testament. But we think of the widow with the oil. She shut the door. It was her and her sons that were allowed to see that. You go to Jesus and he brought John and Peter with him to the garden, right? Like I think John and Peter. He didn't allow everybody. You hear about the 12 disciples. Name all 12. There's a reason that's a trivia question for youth pastors, because we don't know the answer. We got to search it, because who's mentioned? You hear about Peter, you hear about Judas. The rest of them, you only know when he called them. You don't hear about them again very often. The other thing, because it is a different kind of coaching than what you offer, so I will give her a plug here, because if you are struggling with friendship, so if you're watching this and from a Christian perspective, you're struggling with who to let in, and you hear Tasha talking about discernment and you're like, well, I don't have that gift. While there are spiritual gifts, and we won't get all into theology today, but we could, and I would love it. For the sake of time, we will spare you. But there's the gift of discernment, but there's also discernment that as Christians we are called to have, that wisdom. Yeah. And on Andrea St. Louis she's from Step Into Purpose Consulting. She has a friendship group, and it's a 5-week course. She does it in different cohorts. So if you're struggling with that, in that group, she actually looks at what does culture tell us friendship is? What does the Bible tell us friendship is? And what does our past tell us that friendship looks like for us? And then how do we change it? So you can look her up. I'll leave her information and Dr. Darius Daniels information below. But Tasha, tell us, so we've spent a little bit of time here talking tonight. We've talked about grief. Is there anything else that, you know, like, hey, Shell, we can't end before we talk about this? Like, is there another subject that you're really passionate about that you want to make sure we do address tonight?
Yeah. And that's what I always say is mastering the inner critic.
Okay.
A lot of times, because of our pain or our trauma or our loss or our experiences, we talk ourselves out of opportunities. And sometimes we're not aware that we do that, but then we have to kind of go back and unpack. I always say you have to really unpack things that you may have tried to gloss over or things that you may not feel comfortable talking about. But the only way to really be in the present and move forward is to really go back and unpack a lot of stuff. And again, this is a lived experience. So I know what it felt like, you know, from the outside perspective, everyone's kind of looking like, oh, great, you know, she's doing well for herself. She's doing this, she's doing that. But I was still hurting while I was doing these things because I did not get to the root of my pain. And so when I really started unpacking things and started allowing myself to get unstuck from what was holding me back, I then really became the fullness of who Tasha was always created to be. And for me, that monumental moment happened at age 30. It made me realize that because of what happened to me, I carried that guilt with me into dead-end relationships, jobs that were not beneficial for me, you know, and just allowing myself to settle and be okay with that because I didn't think that I deserved more. I didn't think that I deserved the life that God has called me for because of what happened to me. And so I always tell people, you know, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be polished. Allow God to use you. That's that whole potter's wheel. That's the whole point of it. Allow him to chisel you. Allow him to really make you who he's always called you to be, but you have to be willing and you have to be open. And yes, it may be uncomfortable. It may be painful, but it's necessary. It really is, because the only way that you can really discover who you are and what's your purpose to do is if you really get into a relationship with God, because that's the only way you can find your true self.
Amen. Amen. Something, you know, one of my clients loves to say, like, I don't need to unpack stuff. Like, like, let's just move forward. And there's a piece of that I agree with. Some of you watching this, you're not ready yet. So if you're not ready, don't try to do it ahead of time. There is a reason in therapy that there is a timeline. Yes. But I also think, and I love to use the analogy, when you pack for a trip and then you take that trip and you come home, how many of y'all still have your bags packed from trips you took 30 years ago? Like, you unpack it. If at the most, maybe your toiletries bag doesn't ever get unpacked because it's ready all the time. Right. But I mean, unless you're the kind of person who like puts the used up toothpaste in there and stuff, and that I won't judge you, but like, listen, get some help. But but for the most part, like, we are gonna, even the messiest person will unpack because you want to be ready for the next trip. And I really, while I'm not a therapist, I love to play one. Though I like to also recommend that you then go to a real therapist to get the full healing. But it's like, you cannot continue to have baggage and baggage and baggage, or you're going to be sitting in a mess, just like you would be if you never unpacked after trips. And so I love what you said, like, you know, you have to unpack it. You have to figure out getting to the root of an issue. It's like when I remember when I owned my house, we had, I forget what it was called, but it was like a kind of ivy. And oh man, it was awful. It grew, the roots like hung into the tree and got intertwined. And I remember when we would pull it up out of the grass, like there was a time, I think it was like a half-acre lot, and I pulled it from like where the house ended all the way down, just pulling and pulling. And I'm like, does this thing not end? Like right. I mean, I was determined that day, like, I'm going to get all the roots. I couldn't. It was impossible. And there are some things that, you know, you pull it and you think, okay, I got it. That trauma stemmed to the sexual assault. No, it didn't stop there.
Right.
Because that sexual assault may have happened, not to say that you asked it. That is not what this means. But that
Yes.
sexual assault may have happened because you wanted to be loved and you wanted to be liked. So you were with the wrong kind of crowd and you went out to the wrong place at the wrong moment. And I do believe, again, I think when it says God uses all things to the good, I think that also goes for our painful things. I
Sure
really
does.
like you may have been the wrong place, the wrong time, but that became a part of your story and your purpose. Like God will use what we give him. He's a gentleman and he will never force us somewhere. But if we walk into it, he's God. He knows when to use an opportunity to help us get to where we need to go. And so I love that you said you don't have to be perfect. You have to be polished. And I think that polishing, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it is that unpacking. It is that being willing to pull those roots and say, okay, well, I got as far as I can, like with those, I got as far as I could go that day. My arms hurt, my shoulders.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. And then the next weekend I went out and did some more. And I just kept doing it until I could grow things without that choking them. And it never ended. The people living in that house today are probably still dealing with those roots, but it's better than it was when I moved in and it was choking every flower that would try to grow. And so I really, you're making the quotes really easy. Thank you. So Tasha, tell me, we've talked about a lot. We've unpacked a lot. Those of you watching this will share some resources in the bottom. Grief is something that throughout this period of COVID, like we've all been dealing with it in some way. We've never fully understood. One of the positive effects of the last couple of years is mental health is now in the forefront, almost where it's become a cool thing to talk about. So I worry that it's going to become a little watered down. But if you really, it's no longer stigmatized in a way that you've got to be insane to go look for something. And Robin and I had talked about that a little. But it's like, now to be able to say I have a therapist is the same as like I have a personal trainer. We don't judge an overweight person who says they have a personal trainer. We also don't judge the person who's in shape that says they have one. So why would we judge someone who has a therapist? We all need them. And I really think of it as like you use the therapist to get healthy. But you also should still be in therapy when you are healthy. Therapists have therapists. If you the first question y'all should ever ask your therapist is, do you have one? And if they don't, go get a new one, please. Because how do you think they're going to take in everything that you pour on them and they're not going to go talk to somebody? They've got to unpack that, or else you're dumping fires on them that they can't put out. Like, so please, like, I'm dead serious when I ask that. Like, I'm so serious. And we're both shaking our head. So that's the doctor and me. We're both telling you, yes. So, but there's so many styles of grief right now. So many, not styles, like I say that like it's wardrobe, but there's so many like phases and types of grief right now that it's so important. And what we've talked about, well, Tasha's situation is very specific to her. The things she shared on how to deal with it, that applies whether it's job loss, that applies whether it's like loss of your house. I mean, some of you were kicked out of an apartment and maybe to you that felt like, how am I going to complain about that when people are losing loved ones? You have a right to experience that grief. And I think that one of the things that the positive thing is we're talking more. The negative thing is that we've taken and seen so much loss that, and then here we're in the worst situation now. So it's like, well, who am I to complain about this when people are like losing their homes, right? I've seen people like, don't complain about the gas prices because at least you have a car. Yes, I tell you, I am thankful I have a car to fill up and a job that I can afford to pay it for. But it doesn't mean that if I'm down to my last $5 and that gives me a gallon now instead of 2, that just because people are having to move from their house, that in my reality, that's not my biggest pain. And so I think there's an appreciation for understanding gratitude and being thankful where you are. Thank you, Lord, that I have $5 and it fills. But it doesn't make it any more painful that that's only 1 gallon now instead of 2. So never feel like you can't experience your grief fully because it doesn't measure up, because grief is grief.
Yeah.
And while someone else's feels really big to them and feels big to others, yours may feel really big to you, even if it doesn't feel small to others. And you guys are going to handle it in that same way. And you still have to go through all 5 stages.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I like that you mentioned, and I think I definitely don't want to end this without reiterating it, is that there is no timeline. It is not that like, hey, so-and-so got over this in 5 days, or this one, you know, their father died 6 years ago and look at them, they're so happy now, they never cry. You don't know that because you're not with them 24 hours a day. And we are so good at masking. And I think the other side of what you said is some people are really, really good, and I admire them, about knowing who to let in. So it's not that some people, it's not even a masking, it's that they know who to be vulnerable with at that moment. So I think, and this is really a conversation for another time. I think this could give us a whole other hour, but it's like, know who, when we talk about authenticity, vulnerability, that doesn't mean that you tell everybody everything at one time. Tasha's authentic, Tasha's vulnerable, Tasha's transparent, but that does not mean that Tasha is out there telling everything to everybody at every moment. It means that she is who she is 100% of the time. That doesn't mean 100% of the people know every facet of her life. And I think we confuse that, right? It's like, oh, well, you're not vulnerable because you, no. Me not see, I did it again where I start something and then you're supposed to know it was in my
mouth. Love it though. I love it.
But so the being vulnerable means that you are always yourself. Being authentic means you are always yourself. And so when you are experiencing grief, I love that you mentioned that the timeline does not look the same for everyone. And something I wrote down earlier is that grief can come even in the healing. You can have moments. So can you just kind of go with that for a moment and then we'll wrap up. You were talking about this when I had written under this, the say something is better than nothing. So this is when you were sharing the points. Can you talk a little bit about, even when you're healing, even when you're in that polished state, there's still going to be those moments where you're like, I really feel this today.
Yeah. And so like now, so with March 14th just passing, typically, you know, we, my brother and I always be like, okay, like, what are we going to do to try to prepare ourselves, right? But this year, it was different. Like, we were more at a state of peace, right? Okay. And so, but we were questioning on as to whether, do we want to make a post about this, right? Because there's the part that Shell just talked about, being authentic, transparent, and vulnerable, but not allowing everyone in. And so we knew that if we were to post it, then people who typically don't, you know, consider themselves to be in our inner court feel like, oh, now I have access to what's going on. And then for me, that would have created more harm than help, honestly. And so I made the decision not to post. It was kind of like those who were close to me knew, you know, and we had the conversation where they were kind of checking to see how I'm feeling. But I say that to let you know, though, his birthday was November 2nd, right? So we're thinking about, this is now for me, I had a hard time on his birthday. So most of the time people think the milestone of when they passed, you know, your loved one, they think, okay, that may be the day that may not be so good in your healing. It was his birthday. Because for me, it was the awkwardness, like I should be celebrating something, but I can't, right? And when I say that, like, I can't celebrate the way that I would want to, right? As if he were here. So there's that moment where I've had, you know, looking around in a daze, like, what am I supposed to do? Because this feels weird, right? Even though I'm in my healing state, it still feels weird. Even like Father's Day is another that feels weird. It's kind of like, okay, I'm seeing all of these things and, you know, I don't have that opportunity. It's kind of like, yeah, I celebrate my brother. He's a dad. I celebrate other men in my life, like my uncles and my grandfather, but it's not the same. And it's okay to recognize that it's not the same. And so even in your healing and things may feel awkward, or, you know, you just may feel like I'm supposed to be doing something, but I'm not doing it the way that I would want to. It's okay. It's okay to be sad about that. Because every time when I achieve something or I accomplish something, I'm like, my dad would have been right here, like me in school. It's one of those where it's like, yay, but then it's like, you know, and every time you deal with a milestone, it's always going to serve as a reminder that the loss is still there. And so even in your healing, you may have outbursts where you're sad or just cry or just need to talk to somebody, and make sure that you have someone who has the capacity to hold space for you. That's very important, because they won't make you feel bad about it. I have my key people where they're kind of like, all right, if you need me, I'm there. Even if it's just because or something that you think of a memory, it's okay to sit in that moment. It's okay, because to you, that's just a reminder that they've meant something to you. And so, you know, everybody thinks that once you come through this healing journey, that's it, that's the end all be all, and that you're just not going to feel anything else outside of that. That is so not true. Because while you're still healing, you're still processing, you're still learning, you're still dealing. And I think that that's really important to think about. You know, sometimes we get to this place of, oh, I'm not going to feel this anymore because I am healed. I am, you know, at this point I have arrived. And it's kind of like, no, it's quite the opposite, because the more you heal, the more you're still processing, the more you're still kind of recollecting, if you will. And so for me, it's just making sure that you give yourself the grace and the space to sit in those emotions. And then after you sit into those emotions, you find a healthy outlet to deal with them. Because we never want someone to feel like they have no one to talk to. We don't ever want someone to feel like they just need to isolate themselves, because community is very important, but make sure you find the right community.
That is so important. So you said something. There's a young lady through the Millennial talent show. She made a comment one time on Facebook that sat with me and that I love and that I now apply within my inner circle. And she said, I wish that people, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, I wish that people, instead of just texting and dumping, would first say, do you have the capacity to take on my burdens right now? And ever since she said that, my inner circle that I trust with my emotions, if I'm having a rough day and I need to talk about it, I'll text and I'll say, do you have the capacity to hear my pain right now? And if they say no, that's okay, because then you're not the one to listen today and there's no harm. I'm not upset with you, because the point of asking is to make sure that when I share it, you can respond. Exactly. And as somebody who, and I'm still processing through this, like I learned over the last several years with COVID. So COVID happened and some of us were like, oh, we're introverts. We're made for this. We were born for this, right? Tell me, come on. I'm not lying. Any introverts out there know this. We were like, we've been preparing for this our whole lives.
Oh yeah.
And then like 3 to 6 months in, it was like, same four walls.
Yes.
What's going on? And so I did a lot of inner work, and I used this as a time to really deal with myself. And what I learned is I value significance. Yeah. And there's always a healthy way that you can use your values, and there's an unhealthy way. I'll let y'all guess, first two don't count, on which way I have been going for a long time pre-COVID. So for those of you who are a little slower, it was the unhealthy way. And so in valuing significance, what I had done, not realizing that was my value, I had chosen a lot of friends who needed me. Yeah. So when COVID hit and suddenly Shell no longer had the capacity to listen to everybody else's issues, because now I didn't have an outlet. So even with us introverts, right? We introverts, if I'm being grammatically correct, we have outlets, whether it's our writing and going to be like we were talking before about, we can master the keynote speeches, but don't put us in a networking group. That's so different. The one-on-one, we can be all smiles and laughter, but put us in front of a group and we're like,
exactly.
And so now that there was this shutdown, and up here in the Northeast, it was like drastic. Now there's no outlet. So after so many like texts where, and I had like, when I say needed, it was like people who would text and it would be like,
yeah.
And then as soon as they got the answer they needed, and I was so how are other things? Dead silence until next time and so now that becomes a reality, right? You start to realize it. And so as I started saying like, okay, what within me, let's do the work, find out, why do I value significance? How do I use this in a healthy manner? How do I get significance? Understanding I'm a child of God, understanding I'm needed as a mom, understanding healthy needed versus codependence.
Right.
Oh man, the life change. And so I stopped answering those texts.
Oh yeah.
I don't have capacity for it. Guess what? It's a cell phone. Nobody knows if I read it.
Exactly.
I can wait. The freedom now, but also the quietness.
Yes.
And that took a lot to process. And so when you talk about capacity, I had to get to a place where I realized what it turned into is that I got overwhelmed with the capacity because it was all, and that was different where in the pre-COVID, I took a lot in and I was always being like emptied, but in my being like, kind of, how do I say that? Because it's like I'm empty in myself and all of the listening and I'm dry, but then I could go get filled, overflowing, right? So like you went to a worship event and it was like, ooh, or you spent time with friends, tacos, guacamole, oh my gosh, like you got overflowing and now you could take it in. So you don't realize it as much, how much you're living in this empty space because it's almost like by the time you're going to realize it, you get on this other high because you got filled again. Well, now you're in this place where you're like, I have nothing left to pour.
Yes.
It's like desert empty. And so I started realizing, and this also came, I read Relational Intelligence around this time. I was doing serious inner work. like I was like the girl who goes too deep. And yet I was like surpassing myself, like, okay. And like, I want that removed from the human language. Like, I don't think that phrase should be a thing. But I realized that it's capacity and understanding and having, you mentioned boundaries, having the boundary to say, you know what, Tasha, I don't have the capacity to handle this. I would love to talk to you this weekend, but today has been a really long day and I'm not going to be able to adequately share anything.
Yeah.
If you want to just talk, I can listen. But if you need feedback, I'm not your girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if your friend gets upset because you say that, that's drama, not an outlet. There's way difference because when we are friends, when we're truly aligned with one another, we don't want someone going over capacity for us. Right. We don't want them listening if they can't take it in because then we know we've become a burden. And what's it say? Don't cause your brother to stumble.
Exactly.
And so I love, that where it says like a cord is not easily broken, cord of two, cord of three. And so that's why we always should have that inner circle, at least two people that are really tight. Then you have like the 12, that outer circle that still, they know you, but not all of them are there on every moment, but you do life together. And then you have the other ones that they're there when you need them and stuff. So man, so much. This has been awesome. I'm sure we could do a part 2 and dive into a few of these. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I'm going to go ahead and this will go up on YouTube prior. This is a new thing we've been doing. So it'll be up on YouTube and you'll be able to listen to the talk. And then if you're interested in diving a little deeper into a couple of the things, I'll share my thoughts. And then if you're interested, put some comments in there. And if there's enough comments, we'll have another conversation. So, because we love to know that you want to hear it before we record more. So Tasha, thank you. How do they find you if they want to read the book, if they want to be involved in the coaching program, if they want to follow you and learn what else you're doing?
Yeah, my website is ultimately the one-stop shop. So there you're able to connect to my Instagram, my Facebook group, send me a message, and then also sign up for the coaching program. And that is www.lifewithtashaw.com. And then if you just want to kind of follow me on social media and you're not really interested in the other things that are going on, and you just kind of want to see how I am day to day, you can follow me on Instagram at @lifewithtashaw_. And my Facebook group is Tasha W Messenger of Hope. And that's just kind of where I share like inspiration, create dialogue in there, and any other thing that's really important and beneficial to share.
If they want to buy the book, I have not done this. I keep forgetting to ask
Yes.
people, though I have put it in the printed one. Here we go. You guys can tell I'm new to this, huh? It's like I just started yesterday. How do they buy the book from you?
Yes, so if you want to buy the book from me, my website, www.lifewithtashaw.com, and you just send me the message through there, and that way I know that you want the purpose of my.
Perfect. So in case you've been watching all of these chats, because we did talk about a couple of the other authors, every one of the authors is able to sell the paperback themselves. And that's why we want to make it important. Like, so if today you're watching for the first time, you buy it from Tasha. If you already bought the book, you're welcome to buy it again from Tasha, or it is the same book. So it's just a matter of, are you trying to collect all the signatures or are you trying to read the book? So it's totally up to you. We want to give you a chance to really highlight the authors and meet them, but also get to know who the women are beyond this, because while we all came together for the book and met through this platform, as I was reading the book, I was just like, man, these stories, like I was eating this up and it was like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And some days I literally didn't eat food because I was just so overflowing with what I read. And I wanted to give you guys all a chance. So thank you for continuing to come back and read these. If you're new to the channel, I'm finally learning to ask, subscribe below. I'm not super technical, so they're never like fancy, but we do hope that you're blessed by them and that something that you heard really touched you. Connect with us if you have questions. We're not afraid of them. Let's have the dialogue. So you can email Tasha, you can follow me at shellvera.com, where we welcome the conversation. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Thank you, Tasha.
Bye.
Bye.